Howdy, good morning, or good day, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, and good night. Something like that, right? Whatever it is for you, I hope that it's a good one. I hope that you woke up feeling rested and ready for the day. Or if you woke up feeling like I did, I hope that you were able to get on top of your day, even if you're still in the process, as I am. It's part of my process. But I hope that today serves you and that by the end of the day you feel quite satisfied with the work that you've done, with the productivity of the day, and with the rewards that come with the day. Also, if you just need to rest, if you just need a little break and you haven't given yourself that, I hope that you do give yourself that and that it rewards you in its own way. I don't mean to kind of validate this concept that you have to be productive and efficient in order to be valid. That's the worst feeling, and I hate crafting a society where that is the case, or continuously validated as the case. I just don't think that that's how it should be. I think that, I was talking with my roommate last night, and we've been going, I'm sure everybody else is feeling this too. It's just been weird lately. Like, sleep schedules have been all over the place. Things have just been weird. But he had mentioned that, he had struggled to sleep the night prior, like really bad. And he was kind of worried that he would be struggling at work, but then instead he ended up being very wired at work, and he ended up having a really, really good day because of it. He was like, I was too tired to even give a fuck about the same things I normally would. So I was like being goofy and just enjoying myself, talking to people I normally wouldn't, like just being ways I normally wouldn't. And he was like, it ended up actually being really good. And I think that maybe that's part of it, that maybe, when my body is telling me I don't necessarily need to sleep, or I'm struggling to sleep, like to accept that and then to make the most of it. And he was like, I got he's a teacher, so he got a lot of his math homework done, and like was really super productive because he wasn't getting sleep. And I think that's super important to trust your body, where my body's just been doing this weird thing where it like wants me up late at night and then like sleeping. And I don't like sleeping past like, if I wake up at 10 o'clock in the morning, that feels gross to me. It feels like half the day is already over. So I certainly don't like sleeping past 10. But if I'm up until 4 or 5 or close to 6 a.m., chances are I'm probably going to end up sleeping a little past 10. Or I'm going to wake up feeling extra groggy, right? And I don't like any of that. And in part, it's because I'm not on this set schedule. So I'm trying to get myself on a set schedule. But it also, like, I'm letting my body kind of tell me what that schedule is supposed to look like. Because I don't know exactly I don't know what's going on right now. I don't know exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm trying to be as productive as possible with everything that I have. I really, it's kind of coming down to the end of the month, so I really need to be getting all my funds in, all my finances secure in order to get on top, make sure that all my bills are covered and everything for the end of the month. And so I'm like on my grind. I'm doing everything I can, but I'm still not working a consistent job right now. So, and my car broke down. So it's not like I'm on like the greatest times that way, right? But like I've been told just to keep pushing forward, to keep moving on faith, to keep doing what I can do. And, I've been fighting that. I think like this weird sleep thing too is like, me fighting a depression. Generally, when you experience depression, you, which I haven't struggled with for such a long time, and then being in this space where I've had the comfort of being able to actually process so much that I have never been able to process, has taken its toll. But generally, like the way that depression works, you can have depression without even realizing it, because depression isn't just, oh, I want to kill myself, oh, everything's so terrible. It's, I just feel too tired to do what I need to do or what I want to do. I'm just not really, I'm feeling a little under the weather. I don't really have the energy for that. I'm frustrated about this, or I'm emotional about this. Like, it can come up in all kinds of ways. It can come up through headaches. It can come up through random body aches. It can come up through, like I said, just being like a little too tired, or being like overly emotional in different ways. And that's all just the physicality of it. It's once it's more deeply set, that it actually starts to become a psychological issue. And so, I try to be very on guard about these things. I try to be very well aware of these things. I went to therapy for 6 years, to learn how to manage my depression and anxiety. Because managing my depression and anxiety has been the only means of being able to heal from my PTSD. So, and I have. Not completely, by any stretch of the imagination. I have CPTSD, so I'll probably, it's quite complex, and it's not just from one or two situations and scenarios and traumas. So I will likely be processing these things for the rest of my life. I've accepted that. That's fine. If I don't, if there's one day that I just wake up and suddenly I don't have to process that anymore, that'd be great. I already feel like there's been a big weight lifted in that way. But at the same time, like, in knowing myself, I recognize that, like, it's easy for me still to fall into these things. And that's part of it. I think that we all do have different levels of PTSD without realizing it. For instance, the depression that I'm working against right now is the depression that hinges on a validation of working. It doesn't matter even if all of my stuff is covered, even if I'm comfortable, even if everything is paid for. If I'm not productive every day, I don't feel good about myself. So I have a lot of hobbies. I have a lot of things that I do in order to feel productive. And that's great. It's great. It's good to have a lot of hobbies, but it's not good to value yourself by productivity. We're not machines. And it's very easy to do, and then it's very easy to set yourself up for spaces for depression, right? So I try not to do that either. If you're somebody that struggles with the depression and anxiety, those are things that you can find yourself doing, setting yourself up for excuses to become depressed or anxious. And, I also have that in attachment styles. That's really where I'm pretty well mentally. Like, my mental health is generally pretty well. It's taken a very long time for me to work out all of the illness that I had growing up. But I am generally quite well mentally, to the point that I can actually counsel others and care for others, and be a support system for others, and be a go-to for others for their own sense of security and stability. And I do a very good job at it. And I don't have any issues with that. I generally am pretty good about that. Where it comes out that I'm still not fully healed is generally in my super intimate relationships. The more intimate the relationship, the more that you'll start to see those triggers come out. And, that's a harder one to work through, because obviously with a therapist, you're probably not going to have the most intimate relationship, you build an intimacy with your therapist, but your therapist is always going to be your therapist. I've struggled with that, because it's always come down to, even when I had a specialist, or even when I had the same therapist for only a couple of years. They kind of moved around a lot. But it would trigger my PTSD, because I'd be like, oh, I have to pay somebody for this level of intimacy. Because it's not just about engaging in intimacy. It's about being able to engage in it in a healthy way, right? Well, if I'm paying you for it, it just isn't hitting the same way. This is also why I tend to not charge much for any of my services, whether it be, like I've mentioned in other videos, I do sell content, right? I don't charge a lot for that at all. I charge so much less than anybody else is when they have I don't have an OnlyFans, but when people have those types of things, they're charging way more than I ever charge. But I also I'll have phone counseling sessions or video counseling sessions with people. doing my oracle, like I've offered that to people. But generally it just like takes a form of counseling. Sometimes like I had a dude pay me $100 just to talk to me for an hour. And it was extremely beneficial for him. And it was, well, I mean, it was good for me, but like it was extremely beneficial for him. And that was the most I've been paid for the most amount that I've been paid, but I've had people pay me for my time that way, for my advice, for just to have somebody that cares, those types of things. And like, I try to charge so much less than they would ever have to pay for anybody else. That $100 was a lot. That was a tip on top of, you know, what I told him that I would charge him for it. At the same time, my time and energy is extremely valuable. So like when I do these things for free, that's because I feel called to. I feel like there's, you know, part of it does it for me too. It does something for me. When I do it for free, I feel less guilty about taking something from it that way, for sure. But also there's certain things that I do feel led to do for free. But there's also things I feel led to ask for money for, and to be very firm about not receiving less than what I believe I deserve for those things. And that's because I do consider myself quite valuable. I consider what I have to offer valuable. And I care to, you know, offer those things in a valuable way. Also because like, if people aren't paying for certain things, they tend to start taking advantage of those things. So it's also important to kind of create a sense of that value, for people to pay a certain amount for certain things. Because yeah, the cheaper that I've allowed for things, the more of it I have to do in order to secure any sort of actual finances from it, and the more that I have people thinking that my time doesn't mean anything. Like, I'm not sitting here trying to just flirt with you back and forth casually for hours on end every day if you're not somebody I have an intimate relationship with. And I've already put out there multiple times that, like, I'm not looking for an intimate relationship right now. If I happen to engage that way with you, it's probably because we have a history. I'm not one to be given to intimate relationships, to be honest. I am very open and vulnerable right at the surface. And like, I put a lot out there, more than the average person does. I don't have all these different levels that way. But once you hit a certain point of intimacy, that's it. And I generally don't engage with people in that direction. I didn't even engage with my ex-husband in that direction. In fact, most of the partners that I've had have been people that aren't engaging with me that way. And that's also because that's not what I need out of a partner, generally. That's what I need out of a friend. And I don't need my partners to be my friends. As long as me and my partner have the same goals and have good sexual chemistry, I'm generally satisfied in that relationship, to be honest. But I do long for a sense of intimacy, but I also like to be able to keep myself open to be able to engage intimately with others. And a big part of the way that I do that is by offering different types of counseling, offering these different types of spiritual practices. I don't usually ask for money for those things. And it allows to build this sense of intimacy and to get people, like I said, like I tend to put way more out to begin with than the average person tends to. So I'm trying to get people to my level, you know, not to this personal engagement of intimacy where like now we're in some sort of partnership. I believe in a very deep level of intimacy that does not hinge on codependency. That is actively a big thing I'm constantly trying to teach through my personal relationships this way. They're personal because we're getting personal. We're talking about personal things. I'm engaging in building trust in order for people to feel comfortable to share things with me that they haven't shared with other people, that they wouldn't share with other people. And I keep those things. I keep those things very seriously. There's some things that I've put out into the world or that I've put out to other people in conversation that were private things between somebody and I. The only times I've ever done that, where I've like actually used that person's name to the point where it's like breaking a HIPAA violation that way, is when I feel it's necessary for someone's safety and security. And that includes in these videos. You know, I've called family members out and people out in these videos. But I've also called out different behavior or different circumstances that I was with people without using their names, and that's to protect them. Not because I believe that they deserve my protection, but because that's my responsibility as having been somebody in those intimate positions with them. Unless I truly believe that it's something that the world needs to know against this person, I'm going to try my best at least to not release any of those things. I take those things seriously. Even in my personal relationships, I handle things the way that HIPAA would, and that's largely in part because my mom was the type of person where she'd get you to talk very specifically about certain things and certain people and how you felt about certain things, making you think that you were talking to somebody trusted so that you could just vent and express how you felt and kind of work out your feelings with something. And then she would immediately go and tell those people, those exact people. She did that to me multiple times in my life. And that shit fucking broke me. I really don't appreciate that. I find that to be one of the most disrespectful things you could do to a person. It's extremely manipulative. It's extremely controlling. And it's backhanded. It's backstabbing. It's rude. So I try very hard not to be that type of person. I do in my personal experiences, especially as a caregiver or as a social worker in different ways. I'm not a certified social worker, but I have done plenty of social work. And in those ways, I take those experiences personally, and I take them as a point for education. And I'd like to bring my experiences out and to share them with the world so that other people can learn from them. But again, I try not to insist upon people's identities in that way. I try not trying to just call people out. If you happen to be my mom, that's unfortunate for you and me, because that's such a personal relationship that there's no way I could explain that relationship without people knowing exactly who you are. So if you have that personal and intimate of a relationship with me, yeah, those are the ones I hold a sense of responsibility to. That's why I don't often engage in those types of relationships, because I don't want to put somebody in the position of me having any sort of responsibility to them that way, or them having that responsibility to me in that way. Because the people closest to me have fucked with me so many times too. I'm still working that shit out. I'm not trying to add on to it, to be honest. So generally, the only intimacy I fall into is people that I've known for an extremely long time and have been through a lot with, who I don't have to explain myself to. But the average person tends to find themselves being far more intimate with me than they would be with the average person, for the fact that I do have this high level of open vulnerability and intimacy that I can engage in without codependency, which makes people feel safe. And I've crafted that space on purpose so that people do actually have a safe space to be that way. But it's very hard because most people aren't doing that most people, when engaging with me personally, find themselves being triggered codependently, and then they want to attach themselves to me, and then they're feeling some type of way when I'm not allowing those attachments. It's something I'm working out. It's something I'm learning how to process. It's something that I think that the more that I become professionalized about this specific type of work, the less prone people are going to be taking that so personally that way. I want to continue to create that safe space for people to be as vulnerable and open as they want to. But I don't want that to hinge on a codependent personal relationship. I want it to still be something quite professional. And that's why receiving money for such things will also become more integral, because it's a way to validate that the person is paying for a service, that this isn't something so personal. That's why you pay for your therapist, is because that way you can be very open, very vulnerable. You can get to these depths that you would likely not get with anybody else. But there's still that barrier of, this is a professional thing and I'm doing this because it's my job. I care for you, but I care for you because it's my job, right? I don't have to do this personally. At any point, if this were just personally, I could just walk away. The reason I'm doing this is because it's my job. Those things are important. I don't know where all that came from, but as I'm building on this as a business, I do want to make those things clear. I am definitely moving as quickly as I can in a direction of professionalizing all of my skills, and not just giving myself away for free. But at the same time, I don't have a problem giving myself away for free in order to get people to become aware of what it is that I do and to be willing to invest into it to some degree. Also just to build on my different skills. But ultimately, like, I've already done a lot of the work. So when I ask for pay for things, when I expect pay for things, when something becomes that's why that's there. Is to maintain a standard, is to maintain a level of respect, a level of professionalism, to ensure that there's no mistake that this isn't something professional, which just ends up balancing things out. And because my time and energy is very valuable and important and necessary for me to survive, I also have to keep a roof over my head. It doesn't have to be this roof. It could be a smaller roof. That's fine. If I have to downsize because as I move forward in this way, my businesses aren't covering every lavish thing, that's fine. I mean, I don't even have a car right now. Like, I'm not living outside of my means to begin with, but I also don't have a problem breaking those things down so that I'm not the type of person that's going to ask more money just so that I can be more comfortable. I try to value things as properly as possible, and I also try to work within somebody else's means so that they can receive what I believe that they truly need. Okay. Random, but there's a little thing. Okay, so I've got these cards laid out. This is how, I haven't looked at them or really read them yet, but I saw enough that these 4 came out face up, so I put them up here. These will be our clarifiers. Okay, but I haven't read them yet, so. I'm sorry that I can't shut the fuck up. I know I talk so much. Sometimes it's great. Sometimes it's like, okay, we get it. All right, so we have the moon in the upright, the ruler of flux and reflux. The only other time I got this card, it was in the reverse. So seeing in the upright is real pretty, real nice. It's got a scarab in the middle of these 2 towers with giant keyholes. It's got the moon in Pisces. It's a full moon. No, it's not a full moon. We've got these 2 Anubis-like characters. Okay, so the moon is representative of emotions, of one's internal self, of intuition, of the light in the darkness, right? The power of alchemization in that way. The scarab here is a sign of protection, and between the 2 towers, it's this sense of security and safety and being able to trust that there's the knowledge that you receive from the light of day, and then there's this different knowledge that you receive from the light of the moon at night. There was a time that I met somebody for the first time, and by the time he had gotten to my house, because he had been traveling from a long distance, by the time he got to my house, it was probably like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And we sat in the back of his car smoking pot until the sun came up, which was only a couple hours at that point. And in part, it was probably because I was high on pot, right? Pot is a slight hallucinogen, so it can cause your senses to be distorted a bit. It can cause distorted visuals. A lot of people tend to see things in a more cartoonish or exaggerated fashion when they're high on pot. And I would say that as the person that I am, I haven't smoked pot since July. And as the type of person that I am, I naturally tend to be that way. I've been that way since I was a kid. I tend to see things very cartoonishly and exaggerated to begin with. I have a very vivid imagination. I can see things as they are, but I also have this artistic capacity to be able to see things in quite a silly way. And I use it artistically. I don't know if I'm making sense of that, if somebody that doesn't isn't an artist could understand that. But even since I was a kid, I could sit there and just draw and draw and draw and draw and draw because these visuals were in my head constantly, right? And then like I can do that where like I'm looking out and I'm seeing things as they are right now. But if I'm trying to get in a creative mindset, I can like see them in a goofy or exaggerated way in order to draw them a certain way. I'm not very good at realism for that. I have to use I do portraits, but I have to use their actual picture in order to do it. I do characters of people at best if I'm just like trying to do it out of my head. This is a recent portrait that I did of a friend. But like even like the way that I draw things is very basic line work that way, right? It's not, it is very basic line work. I don't want this to get ruined. I'm working on another one. So it's still cartoony. Where am I going at with this? Wait. Okay, so when I was with this guy, I was smoking pot, right? And so I think that was in part of what had caused it. But as the sun started to come up, we had been sitting in the dark for so long that my eyes had completely adjusted to the dark. So, and this is the first time I'm seeing him in person. I'd seen him over online, but I hadn't seen him in person. So seeing his face in the dark, my eyes had adjusted enough that I could see what he looked like. And because I already had an idea of what he looked like, I could see what he looked like, right? But as the sun started to come up, and within like 20 minutes to half an hour of the sun coming up, also he made me wildly uncomfortable. I will say that. I probably shouldn't have been spending any of this time with him, let alone gone off and lived with him. I've learned a lot in my years, but I digress. As the sun was coming up, I noticed that as the light was changing, it was like casting these different shadows on his face, right? Because the light and like my face looks different here, it looks different here, it looks different like depending on where the light is. So it was very much like that. Only it was creeping me the fuck out. And probably because of how exaggerated it was, like I said, like probably because I was high and because he already made me uncomfortable. But it was almost like terrifying as the light, as the sun came up and as the sun rose and as it came out, and now everything's lit by the sun, and it's the sun of day, and I can see his actual face for exactly what it is. He looked very different than what he had looked like in the dark, and I had gotten comfortable to how he looked in the dark. And like I said, because I had seen pictures of him online, I already had this idea of what he looked like, and it was almost like in the dark, my brain was just like pinpointing certain features and was like, okay, that's what he looks like. But in the light of day, you could see the fullness of all of those features, and you could see them at all these different angles where they didn't quite look the same. And I just remember it giving me this really uneasy feeling. And so that was largely in part because back then too, like I didn't know myself enough to be able to trust myself at all. So as soon as I started having these uneasy feelings about this man, I didn't have something strong enough to fall back on to be like, you know what? I'm just not comfortable with this. I'm really sorry you took the entire trip out here, but I don't think this is for me. I did not have the wherewithal to be that way at that time. I felt very guilty that he had spent all of that energy and money to come out to see me, and that I didn't feel comfortable with him. So I just sucked it up and was like, that's my own problem. That's what I get for meeting somebody online and having them come all the way out this way before actually knowing them. I just took it. And I learned the hard way that that's not the best option in those circumstances. Okay. So what I'm getting from this is that in the midst of this in-between between these two towers, the two towers being something much more secure. You know, they have these keyholes in the beginning. They're much more secure. So between the concept of like, I was secure with the idea of who he was before I let him come visit me. But that was all just virtual, right? And I'd already done this before, meeting people online and then meeting them in person. So I already knew that there's always some sort of contrast. There's always some sort of new, like, kind of got to get to know you all over again a little bit. But we have something to work off after we've met each other online. But between that and then actually getting to know him in person and trying to be comfortable with him in person was this spans of uncomfortability. And it was uncomfortable because I didn't have this self-protection here. And so I'm seeing the scarab as myself, as my internalized self. And largely in part, I guess, because it's the moon card. But the scarab, generally is seen as an external protector. They would put jeweled scarabs in sarcophaguses. Is that how you say that word? Sarcophaguses. In order to protect somebody's spirit as they moved on into the next life. But I'm seeing it even as me, and like maybe in part it's because I'm a Scorpio. Like, so I resonate very much with like creepy crawly creatures. With something being like a hard-shelled body. Like I was just talking about like my intimacy. Like, because these experiences forced me to break into what my intimacy is like and how to be intimate whatsoever. Because I do have this hard shell. I'm a super sensitive person on the inside. I'm super, super soft and sensitive, which is what makes me good at spiritualism to some degree, is because I'm sensitive to receiving certain things. But I do have this hard-bodied shell, which often comes across as arrogance. It also comes across as like intimidation. Like, it's terrifying. A lot of people don't like looking at scorpions, let alone being near them or letting them touch them. Like, it's terrifying to them. They're very creeped out. Even if it's like, you realize what a tiny, sensitive little creature this is, but they got a poison tail, and that's enough for people just to be absolutely terrified of them. Also because they're just creepy looking. Even if it's like a zookeeper, and they're like, this one, its tail's been clipped, like it can't hurt you. So it's totally fine. People are still like, ugh, I don't want anything to do with that, right? I felt that same way about myself. For a really long time. I resonated with the ways that others had treated me. And largely, I wasn't realizing that it was because of my own insecurity. I was projecting this, I'm not to be trusted. I'm gross. I'm scary. I'm intimidating. And I would project that onto other people, and then they would receive that. And then I would receive what they were receiving. And then I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm gross. Until I knew myself and until I was willing to embrace myself, I didn't recognize those qualities in me, and I didn't recognize why other people were receiving those things. And I remember always being like, why don't people just love me? When meanwhile, like, I was being this creepy creature, like, I was being fucking weird, and I was expecting other people to do things that I wasn't willing to do myself, like love me. It's never gonna get you anywhere good. So like, it's all giving me this going internally to really recognize yourself, to really be able to embrace yourself, to become your own protection so that you can be the one that is standing between this or that, either or, in order to make those decisions. I had mentioned that in my last reading, the importance of being able to both things, and I use that term a lot, kind of goofily. I do it in a goofy way. But it's important. But like, if you don't know yourself, you can't both. That's why so many people want this or that, one or the other. They don't know how to both. And you see that in the political realm, right? Like, you see people like, it has to be red or it has to be blue, has to be left or it has to be right, where it's like, literally nothing actually works that way. And if you are so demanding that things have to be that way, that's why everything ends up so fucked up. It used to be that a representative would fall on one side or the other because of how much they stood for certain things, and that it was the voters themselves weren't falling on one side or the other. That was for the people that they were voting for. The people who were voting were supposed to just go off of their beliefs, which did create that left or right, but they were supposed to just go off their beliefs and just choose whoever followed their beliefs the most, regardless of if they were left or right. But it's become so definitive. People have become so bad at being able to both, and so hard pressed against the concept of being able to balance between those things, that suddenly it's not just red or blue. It's like a war between the two, right? we're like, oh, you voted for that person? No, 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 no. All these different things that you can say. I mean, it's become absolutely just wild. It's because people aren't fully aware of themselves. They are identifying themselves by the external things. If I were to just, like I did, that's why I was confused. I had just trusted the identification of the virtual experience I had of this person. That by the time that I met them in person and got to see them in the light of day, it was not who I had learned them to be. And that was extremely conflicting. And without this strong sense of self, I fell into a very unsafe situation. And I can speak from other experience that like that happens very easily. And that's the importance of knowing yourself. It's not the importance. All I speak on is the constant importance of knowing yourself. But that is one of them. Okay, we have that clarified by Temperance, daughter of the reconcilers. These cards are so wild. I really wish that you could see them clearly, but my camera sucks. She's pouring out. I can't even say that it looks like water necessarily, because I think water is depicted differently in other images. It almost looks like she's pouring out like a sort of mercury, like it's like a solid and a liquid at the same time. And then she's pouring out, oh, she's not even pouring out. Then she has like this like electric or electricity wand. What would you call that? Like a metal wand that picks up electricity and then becomes a conduit for it. She has that, and then she has this mercury, and she's pouring them into this giant bowl. And some of the electricity is jumping up out of where she's putting it. Some of it's jumping out of the bowl, and some of it's jumping up into the mercury, right? And so it's this alchemy, this alchemization process here. The daughter of reconcilers, Temperance. Temperance obviously is being patient with oneself and with one's experience. But the daughter of reconcilers is giving me, and like because of this very alchemical image, it's there's quite a balance. She has one wing on the left side and then this like swoosh of energy on the right side. It's very interesting, but it's giving me this balance again. When you're being truly patient, like, okay, if you're having a conversation with a person and you're actively actually listening to them with a genuine sense of patience, not just, okay, I'm waiting for them to shut the fuck up so I can talk. That's not genuine patience. But if you're actually engaging with that person in conversation, the genuine patience means that you're actively listening. You're not just waiting and listening so that you can speak, so that you can respond. You're actually trying to take in what it is that they're offering. You're receiving that, and then you're responding from an actual reaction to those things, not just an innate response that way. And the daughter of reconcilers, like the reconcilers, the reconciliation is the bringing together of two things that have been divided. So the reconcilers are those that work for the balance of things. And to be the daughter of reconcilers is to kind of be given to that process, but also to be given to the receiving of that natural state. It's not just that it's one's responsibility as a job, it's one's responsibility in their innate self. And so again, it kind of is giving me back into the same energy with the moon of knowing your innate self. This isn't something that you just do so that you can control things. This is something you can do so that you can know yourself, so you can protect yourself, so you can give yourself more freely, more genuinely, so you can receive of your experience more truly and genuinely. Okay. But what I'm getting right now too is that like everything that I've stated is great information and it's helpful, but not like, oh, it's such great information. I don't mean to say it like that. Like it's all great and good. But what's the point of it? If there isn't somebody specifically asking for this information, why is this what's being spoken about? This recognizing one's most internal self in order to balance between what is perceived and what is received truly, or what is assumed and what is come to fruition, what is seen from one direction and what is seen from the other direction even. What is it exactly that we're actually talking about? So we move into Fortitude, which is the Strength card in the reverse, the daughter of the Flaming Sword. And that is clarified by the Six of Cups in the reverse, the Lord of Pleasure, represented by Leo and Scorpio. I love that the Scorpio card is death, but it's also in this deck pleasure. That's great. But they're both in the reverse. Fortitude in the reverse is like being able to be vulnerable. Pleasure in the reverse is being able to be humble and vulnerable, like not demanding. You don't have to be on the defense. You also don't have to be on the offense. Love isn't to give or receive, but to just let things be. To simply look at something, just to acknowledge something's existence speaks of a more genuine love than having to cling to it, or then having to release it because you've already clung to it. Or then having to be like, you know what, it's fine. You can do whatever you want because I love you. As if that's not controlling, right? Love is just to literally just let that thing be what it is and then continue to love it. So what I'm getting in this is kind of like what I was talking about. I wasn't sure exactly why I was getting to everything I was getting in the beginning. I've struggled with vulnerability and intimacy most of my life. Largely in part because my dad died when I was born, which, of no fault of my own, gave me some daddy issues. And then I was raised by my stepdad, but he was always very apt to make sure that we knew that we weren't his actual kids, and like made fun of us a lot, dogged on us a lot for being not his children. If we were his children, we would have been intellectuals. We would have been good at, math and science. We would have been athletic. We would have been cooler. But every once in a while he would give us credit that as our dad's kids, we were creative. We were good musicians. We were good artists. We were very creative that way. And then he would, chalk himself up like, well, I guess it's good then that you have me as a stepdad to balance out all of those things. Which was fair and true. It just wasn't very helpful to my struggles with intimacy and vulnerability that the man raising me when I didn't have a dad was one that was also like, nah, I could take or leave you. He did. He disowned me when I was a grown-ass adult. Told me straight up that he didn't want anything to do with me, didn't want me in his life. Granted, that was directly after I told him, you're not my dad and you can't tell me what to do. But that's the first time I've ever done that, and I did it as a fucking grown-ass adult. I was almost 30 years old. I was 30 years old. I was over 30 years old. I was over 30 years old. And that was the first time I'd ever pulled that one on him. He had it coming. For all those years, I referred to my stepdad as my dad. And then I referred to my real dad as my real dad. as I've grown up, I realized that actually complicates things for some people. So I try to refer to my stepdad and my dead dad, which my dead dad just loves. Let me tell you what, he thinks it's funny. He gets it, but he's dead, so it's not like he can fight it. But like those things already, and then like the thing was that like the bond that my mom and my stepdad had was like a bit toxic at times. They just weren't very good at teaching me how to be vulnerable in a healthy way, especially when I was growing up in a home where like, you know, different types of incestuous sex assault were happening. You know, to whatever degree, even the smallest degree of those things can warp a child's sense of intimacy. So to have those things kind of just brushed under the rug and ignored, and to even go as far as like treating me like I was in the wrong for wanting to talk about those things, just keep it hush hush, like we don't talk about it, just deal with it, essentially. That warped my sense of intimacy, and my sense of vulnerability was already kind of warped. And then to watch my parents with each other, were like, the most vulnerable you would see them was my macho ass stepdad swearing that it's gay for a man to have feelings, and then making fun of my mom for being emotional, even though that's the state of women, but that's what makes women so dumb and weak, you know, is because they're emotional. And then my mom being mentally ill, and largely in part because of the PTSD she had from my dad dying, but also from like traumas from her childhood and stuff, and then just never getting help. She managed quite well, but she was mentally ill, and it would come out in her emotions and her vulnerability, where if she became too vulnerable, she'd start freaking the fuck out. She'd start screaming and yelling and ranting and raving, and it was like really hard for me to recognize what was healthy intimacy and vulnerability. That's why I care so much about those things now. And I recognize those things so easily, and the toxicity of those things so easily in others, and care very much to help build a space where people can have access to those things. Because I spent most of my life working extremely hard to have access to those things myself, right? So I want to be able to share that with people because I know how beneficial that can be and how hurtful it can be to not have those things. But because of that, yeah, I just always struggled, to the point too, like my sexuality was all warped and shit. So like by the time that I was 19, I got a best friend who I became more intimate with than I had with anyone else. Not sexually. We were never sexually involved. Now, he was interested in me sexually. He was interested in me romantically, and I was not interested in him in that way. Largely in part because I felt so intimately with him. Those things had always been so entirely separate for me. The only person that those things weren't separate with me with were my brother. And the older I got, the more I started to realize how messed up that was. And that I had an obvious trauma bond with him, and that it was unhealthy, and that it was warping my sense of intimacy, my sense of vulnerability, my sense of sexuality. So I started trying to move away from those things. And so that's why I found a different guy that became my best friend, right? And that I could engage in this level of intimacy with. And that was, you know, after like my brother's gone off and like he's grown now and he's, you know, doing his own things and everything like that too. But I was very much trying to move away from that weird connection of intimacy and sexuality, because it had always been incestuous in my experience. So I wasn't comfortable with that, and I wasn't looking for that. So that's how it registered to me. And that's why, like, with him being my best friend, like, I was like, I'm not interested in you at all romantically. I'm interested in you intimately. Like, this is the state of the relationship for me. And he tried to be understanding of those things. At the same time, this was prior to me even I had started to recognize my issues within my family, with my relationship with my brother, but I hadn't vocalized them ever, not even to myself. So I truly, like, I'd never at this point, like, put a label on those things as any sort of, like, sexual deviancy as any sort of actual incest. We didn't talk about things like that. We mostly just made light of things. We made jokes of things. Everybody was aware that these things were happening, and it kind of just all got brushed under the rug. So I didn't know myself well at that time either. And as I built this intimacy with this person, we became quite conflicted because he wanted, the more intimacy we engaged in, like the deeper and closer that we got, the more that he wanted a sexual relationship with me, a romantic relationship with me. But that always triggered me as just incestuous codependency. I couldn't get away from it. And he ended up, no, I'm for the sake of time, and I've told this story, I think, before. Maybe it's something that I can take the time to make a whole video about again. He ended up dying. It wasn't officially recognized as suicide. Also, apparently in the autopsy, he was completely sober at the time, but it was under very mysterious circumstances, and there was a lot he had told me leading up to it that gives me a fully different impression of what actually happened. But at 23, he was gone, and that continued to fuck with me for quite some time, to the point where I kind of doubled down on not engaging super intimately with anyone, or at least just keeping my sexuality and my intimacy truly separate, to the degree, and I've always been a very sexual person, and I've also always been like a very intimate person. So like kind of what happened, like I mostly was just disjointed, and I was willing to engage in very open, deep, emotional relationships with people, but there was just these certain aspects of my core person I would not involve in relationships. And those are some essential core aspects to building on a genuine sense of intimacy, on trust. I never had a partner I could actually trust. I have not. That's always been a struggle for me. I continued to bind myself to people that I had this toxic dynamic with. And, you know, it took it took until that guy that I met, this guy that I met, who as soon as I met him, I was like, oh, this isn't good, but I already felt bad enough. So I just let it continue. And through the abuse that I went through in that relationship, I came out of it and realized, like, okay, I'm the common denominator in this. There's something wrong that I am responsible for, that I need to change, or this is just going to keep happening, if not getting worse. The fact I survived that, I was extremely lucky. I had people at work telling me that they were in fear for my life and that they didn't want to see me ending up on the news and that I needed to get out of the situation that I was in. And at that point, I realized how serious it was, because I was like, I will end up on the news, and they'll end up being interviewed and being like, yeah, we told her that we didn't like that situation. We weren't comfortable with that guy. We really thought that things were bad, but she just didn't listen. The guy himself was telling me that I was going to end up dying there if I didn't get out. So it was like, you know, what I'm seeing here is that like that struggle with intimacy and vulnerability in myself, and how so much of it came from not recognizing myself and not being able to fully embrace myself. Obviously, in the past few readings, that's what I've been talking about, is this continued struggle to fully embrace myself as this gross, creepy, beastly little thing that I am. That is what I am. That's okay. I'm like a jeweled scarab, right? I can look very pretty to some degree on the outside, but there's also an intimidation factor there. There's also something that is creepy to me. As soon as this jeweled scarab opens up its wings, people get terrified, because they're like, oh my god, yeah, it's a beautiful beetle, but like it's also a beetle, and so people are already grossed out by it. But the fact, when they realize that it can fly, most people aren't a fan of that. Most people don't like that. A lot of people don't like that. And within the past like year, especially this year, during cicada season, like I love cicadas. I've always kind of had a thing for them, but it's progressed more and more over time. And this year specifically, I found myself incredibly connected to cicadas, and I found several. I found several of them that I connected with when I was working in Wisconsin this summer. But I found two of them in the same exact spot on a walk with my client that were dead, and it's just their corpses. And I kept them, and I have them in my car. They're beautiful. They're so beautiful. And it's like the more that I see them, like they used to creep me out when I was little, but like the more that I see them, the more that like I really, really like them. They're beautiful, and I really like, they're cute to me. And like it's the same thing with like all these creepy crawly bugs and like these things that like I grew up in really kind of extreme churches that taught that like spiders and bats and owls and goats and cats and any sort of creepy crawly thing like snakes and stuff are all literally of the devil. That's what the pastor that I had mostly growing up, that was his belief system. We went to other churches where they didn't believe that, but the pastor I had most of my life did. And I had a pet snake when I was a kid. My parents got me a pet snake, and he literally believed it was it's a serpent, meaning that it's like a devil. And it was part albino, so she had red eyes, and that to him was very demonic, and he believed me to be demonically oppressed. And I, when I started going through my PTSD therapy, I saw a specialist for EDMR, and he was an ex-pastor. And I remember, like, at first I thought that would be a good person because he would understand the religious abuse and like a lot of the different issues that I had because of the context of religion within my family and my upbringing. I just can't with Christian counselors. I'm over it. Never again do I ever want to go to another Christian counselor. He ruined it. He ruined it. He absolutely ruined it. He told me that I was demon oppressed and then made me pray in Jesus' name over myself and then hugged me afterwards for an extended period of time. And all of that, every single aspect of that made me wildly uncomfortable. That was just not what I was there for. I remember after that being like, yeah, okay, y'all in your faith, you don't even fucking get it. I would love if there were Christians that really, like my old pastor and his wife, I didn't really get to know the pastor very well, to be honest. I appreciated his level of education, especially when it came to like Hermeticism and Gnosticism, because I hadn't had a pastor that understood those things before. And he would apply those things, and I appreciated that. That's also why my brother thought that he worked for the Illuminati, and so that became like a whole thing. But I think my family still goes to that church, so I don't really know. I don't know. There's so much in it, but like, I would love if Christians could embrace these things more. The concept of like, you don't have to be afraid of the dark. You don't have to be afraid of evil. You're not supposed to be afraid of death. You're not supposed to be afraid of all of these things. You're supposed to be living in the light of Christ so that you can overcome those things. If you truly claimed the power of Christ, haven't you put death to death? Why are you still afraid of death? Why are you still afraid of people? Why are you still afraid of evil? Why are you still afraid that the devil is around every corner? I just don't see many real Christians nowadays, and it's a shame. But then again, like, because of the work that I do in the dark, these types of ways, I'm not, like I said, like I met this dude in the dark. And in the dark is how I got to know him. And it was in the light that I found a lot of fear, and at that point I had to work through those things. And now I'm not afraid of the light. I'm also not afraid of the dark. People think I'm a witch because of the work that I do, and because they're afraid of so many different things, and I'm not afraid of those things. That's not witchcraft. That's me having actually done the work that we're all being asked to do. Like, especially Christians. When Christians think those things, it's like, I'm literally doing what you're supposed to be doing. What are you talking about? Wild. But like all of these things had led to me not fully being able to properly embrace myself, right? In the beginning, we have this the importance of embracing yourself. And then it reveals, I ask, like, what was the, why are we even talking about this? Well, because I'm struggling with that. And I don't think I'm the only one struggling to fully embrace who we really are. Now, the next card that we have is the Emperor in the reverse, Son of Morning. Morning, like when the sun comes up. But it's in the reverse. And the first thing I noticed is because as I was talking about it, I noticed this bug here. I'm pretty sure it's Beelzebub. In the, I think it's in the Goetia. There's depictions of certain demonic forces, whether it be, Astaroth, Azazel, Lucifer, Beelzebub, like Behemoth, those names, those terms, they're all conglomerately used to define the devil in Christianity, but like in Catholicism, they take on their own worlds. And in Islam, I believe some of them translate. In Judaism, or at least within the Cabal, they tend to take different forms. And then obviously like different forms of devil worship. That's what they're referring to. And like it's depictions of those things, like the Baphomet being a goat person, Beelzebub being a bug. Those are the depictions that have caused like my old pastor to believe that those things are innately demonic. But I don't believe any of this is innately demonic. That's why I don't have a problem working with it. Because if I did, the Star of David is about one of the most demonic symbols you could possibly ask to see. And I'll tell you, when I see the flag of Israel, it does tend to make me feel a type of way sometimes. It actually is very pleasant to me to see it in this type of form in comparison. But that's the whole power behind symbology, behind symbols, right? Like, they can mean so many different things depending on what they're used for. The swastika, prior to being used by the Nazi Reich, and prior to being inverted, meant something completely different. It meant almost the exact opposite of what it ended up meaning now. And now when you see a swastika, you know what the fuck you're dealing with, right? But it's the same thing as a cross. Most of the times that I see a cross, depending on who has it and how they're using it, I'm like wary of those types of people. Because generally people using a cross are either using it like, I'm seeing the fucking Nordic style cross here actually on my tankard mug from England. That's like what the Templars use as their cross. That cross is like the cross of like crusading, missionaries, like bringing your beliefs to others sort of deal, fighting for what you believe to be right. Where like the Christian cross, like I generally see as a symbol of hypocrisy. I see it as like literally, generally when I see a Christian cross, I'm seeing somebody who is not carrying their cross. Somebody who feels like it's okay for them to judge others, and they don't know themselves. It's a symbol to me of I have forgone my responsibility to truly know myself, and I get away with it by claiming it to be sinful. Of course, these are all my beliefs, right? This is coming from a woman dressed in fucking black lace with red lipstick, right? I get it. Terrifying, sensuous, devil, Jezebel. I embrace these things because I do not give them power over me that way. Like, I'm not going to give power to evil. I think that that's what makes those things evil. I don't believe that an owl is innately evil. I think an owl is incredibly powerful and that those symbols can be good and that it's for us to make the determination as to how we use these symbols. I can't believe I've already been talking for over an hour and we still have 4 cards left technically. Okay. underneath the Emperor, I have the Nine of Wands in the upright, the Lord of Great Strength. Next to this, we have the Universe, the Great One of the Knight of Time. Beautiful. And the Ten of Cups in the reverse. I guess that is water. They depict water differently in different cards. The water in the Six of Cups is totally different than the water here in this Ten of Cups. But the Ten of Cups in the reverse, Lord of Perfected Success. In the reverse. Okay. Maybe I could do a two-part on this because I honestly feel like this is actually an incredibly deep reading. It's hitting for me quite personally, which is why I keep getting up in my emotions, and I'm not necessarily trying to do that. I do want to give this in a way that is easiest for others to be able to receive from. There's a lot of education here because there's a lot of personal experience of mine here, which is why it feels so personal to me. But I do want to believe too that, like, if it's something I can learn from and process and pull from, then there's others that need to receive these things. And I've already been being reminded this entire past week to keep moving forward and to keep processing myself and to keep, like, being willing to be honest and vulnerable and keep moving in that direction and leaning in that direction, because there is a gift the universe is trying to give others through me personally. And so much of that, I believe, is this power over darkness that so many are finding themselves in fear of. When I was talking to my roommate last night, like, that was something that he had mentioned, that despite how great of a day he had, he's been struggling, especially with everything that's been going on in politics, with feeling like he can just be himself around his coworkers, because he's scared that if he says the wrong thing or does the wrong thing, that suddenly other people are going to be, like, offended, or that they're going to threaten him, or, you know, that they're going to feel some type of way and try to defend themselves against him or become offensive towards him. And I believe that that fear is validated. I would love to illegitimize it, to be honest, any fear. I would love to bastardize any type of fear, because I don't want it to have power. I don't think that living in fear is the best option for anybody. However, there's a process of that. Like, it's not just a total bastardization. It's not just, bastardization. It's not just a total, like, defiance against fear either. Fear serves a purpose. It is part of survival. You know, rabbits are constantly, like, fucking afraid of everything, right? But that doesn't make them bad, and that doesn't make them wrong, and it doesn't make them weak. That actually is part of their power, to be so keenly aware of so many things. My PTSD is in part brain damage from trauma, but it's in part a response to brain damage in order to protect myself from the experiences that I've undergone. CPTSD gets quite complicated because it's like your brain is like, how did you go through that thing again when we already took on this damage and put out this disorder in order to try to keep you from going through that again? So, like, if you go through similar different traumatic experiences, it starts to compound on itself and become quite complicated. But it is the body's natural way of processing experiences that it couldn't process within the actual experience. You carry those things with you. It's not just, you can't just tell somebody with PTSD, like, well, just forget about it. Just let it go. It's not that easy. These things are literally built into your system at this point. Your subconscious receives your experience in such a way, and it is constantly computing those things and processing those things in order to help you survive in the future. It becomes a part of you. Every one of your experiences does. There's no way to remove yourself from that. The best that you have is to properly process things so that you can take out of that processing in a healthy way and move forward in a healthy way from those experiences. Receive an education from them in order to move forward, rather than a defense mechanism. But even that defense mechanism is helpful. And there's been times that my PTSD triggers, like, sometimes I might seem a bit crazy. Sometimes I might be like, what the fuck is wrong with that bitch? I wasn't even doing anything. And I'm just like, you know what? I'm not comfortable with this and I'm just going to leave. And then I'll just like block people off. Okay, I will admit that there has been times that it has not properly served me. At the same time, there's been times that I've done that exact thing and it all felt the exact same way and looked the exact way. But in retrospect, I was able to look and see that it actually did protect me from potential danger, from falling into the same sort of thing I had fallen into prior. So I'm not going to speak ill on it because I think it's an important thing. And I think that there's a reason that we do it. And I don't think that having PTSD makes you weak. I don't think that being given to depression or anxiety makes you weak. I don't think that having a mental disorder or an emotional disability of any sort, I don't think any of those things make you weak. I don't think mental illness makes you weak. You might be sick, you might be ill. It might not be the healthiest way of being. But if you get a cold, there's something to be learned there. There's an immunity that you were lacking that you can now, if you take the time to, you can properly address and hopefully build up an immunity for so that you don't get sick that way again. That's supposed to be the idea of taking flu shots, but the only time I ever got one was for work and it made me sick, and I've never had the flu prior, and that year I got the flu after getting the flu shot. Not only did it get sick after having the flu shot, like I got this weird cold and shit like that and felt real sick for like 4 days, but then later that year during flu season, I got the flu, which I have never gotten prior. So I haven't gotten the flu shot again since, and I've been fine. Okay? That's not me promoting some sort of political standard. If you're somebody who's continued to get the flu shot, your body probably does need it. If you're somebody we didn't get shots like that growing up. So my body has its own natural immune system. But there are people that are immunocompromised that do require those things, and I'm very thankful that we have the technology for those things. I don't think it's one or the other. I think we constantly need to be able to both. What's best for the gander is best for the hen, or whatever, right? The goose and the gander, whatever, however it goes. But that's not always the case in society. It's every individual. The whole point of developing things to the degree that we are is so that every individual can have proper access themselves to be able to engage with themselves properly. But every individual is an individual. They're different. They've gone through different experiences. They've experienced things different ways. You can't even take two Siamese twins are experiencing reality quite differently. I don't care how similar they are. I don't care if they have the same name. They're two different people experiencing things very differently. Even if you are literally attached to a person, you're seeing things from their left and they're seeing things from your right. So there is no way that those things are wholly the same. That's the importance of being able to advance in these ways, but also to allow people to have the choice and the freedom to be able to choose what is best for them and do what is best for them. Okay? Because I grew up with kids that did require different types. They had all types of allergies and stuff like that. I also know people that swear that that was because of the flu shots that they were getting. I don't know. The entire family was sick, so I think a lot of it had to do with genes. I think if your first 3 kids have deficiencies and are born with different types of ailments and disorders, you can probably tell that your genes mixing together aren't the healthiest thing. I don't know why you'd continue reproducing, but I'm a dick for that, right? I don't get why people are reproducing most of the time. That's my own opinion. I'm not judging. I love kids. I love people's kids. I love other people's kids. I don't even want my own. I love other people's kids. They're cute. They're incredible. They're fascinating. I love watching people learn and be vulnerable, and kids are wild. But yeah, I mean, I'm getting totally off track. There's so much I could say. It's just, there's always going to be this is light and this is dark, and this is light and this is dark. When I was talking to my roommate last night, that was something we were talking about, was religiously. I was raised Christian, and I was very sheltered. but I did grow up around people that weren't Christian as well. And I was taught that the way to paradise, the way to heaven, that the right path to take for righteousness is the straight and narrow. But it's a difficult path, and it's hard to get through the gate at the end, and only one person can do it, where at a time, right? Like it's like their own path, where the wide path has lots of people on it, and it winds and curves through all the beauty of the world, and everybody's just tra-la-la-la-la as they're on it, and the gate is wide open, and everybody can go through it, but that's the one that leads to destruction. And I've always conceived that, but how I've taken that is that each individual is important. Each individual has their own responsibility to themselves, to their highest power, and to the world in which they exist, which is different from the world in which I exist. My world revolves around me, whether I want it to or not. It's not like me being arrogant, like, oh, the world revolves around me, but literally because I am an individual perceiving my experience, the world is revolving around me. No, the world revolves around the sun. I get it, but like, your world revolves around you as much as my world revolves around me, as much as anybody's world is revolving around them. We all have a personal responsibility to ourselves as an individual. And what an individual is a very singular aspect of a collective whole of other individuals. So it's all this whole balance. It's this constant ebb and flow. It's this constant giving and receiving and balancing and letting things go. And, like, it's always a both thing. It's always a mixture of all of these different things. And so the way I see the straight and narrow is that for each individual, there is a path. For each individual, there is a path. There's the path that they could take that everybody else is taking, that's led by the opinions of others, the validation that others are able to offer, the convenience of having the support of others along it. And the issue is that path, when you're just following everybody else and not truly taking the time to get to truly know yourself, that path will lead you away from truly knowing yourself. And that paradise, heaven, the end goal for each individual, what it truly is to be able to know oneself, to be able to be wholly connected to one's highest power. Only you can do that as an individual. It's something so extremely personal, which is why that path is, although it's straight because if you were to veer off this way or veer off this way, that isn't you. It's easy enough to do, especially with our ego that likes to convince us that it's us, and then it does all of these different things and requires all of these external validations. But truly, it's getting to the center of yourself is always like this straight path, straight to who you are at your core, right? And that is the path for every individual, individual. So I don't believe personally that you can stand up at a pulpit and speak on what the path is supposed to look like for every individual. There can be a set sense of morality, but those things are all going to be relative according to the individual. They truly are. Just because everybody has their own individual experiences. What's important is that people are getting to who they truly are and having that they're not identifying themselves by these external standards that are wishy-washy and go this way and go that way, that ultimately lead them away from their truest, highest power. And I don't think, I think for some people that may look like one religion or another, or no religion at all. I think it's for the individual to know themselves, to truly get to that point and to truly know those things. And I also think that those things are determined by a specific space and time. Like I've said, in my opinion, religion is a crutch used in order to help people walk on their own. And if you have a broken leg, there's nothing wrong with using a crutch. In fact, it's quite helpful and good so that you can build up your strength. But if you can walk on your own 2 feet, you don't need a crutch. And if you keep using a crutch, you'll end up either limiting your capacity to walk on your own 2 feet, you'll create a codependency on something that you don't actually need, or you'll be walking around with this thing that you end up using in ways that it wasn't meant to be used. It's ultimately not the best thing. There's a process for these things for every individual. But I think that atheism could also be part of that. Atheism is also a crutch. It's not a religion. It's its own, it's the opposite of religion, right? But like that serves the same purpose. All of these things can come into a person knowing who they truly are. How I brought it up to my roommate too was that, you know, I've seen people who literally had to be heroin addicts and almost die multiple times on heroin to be able to come to God, to their highest power, to their truest selves. I don't know why that's the case for some people. I don't know why some people have to hit rock bottom in order to get to that point. I have myself. It didn't look like that, but I have myself constantly had to have everything ripped out of my fucking life in order to be able to actually only have that connection and to be able to trust in that. The second that there's something else, I find myself trusting in something else, right? So like, I don't judge when it comes to that. But what I've seen is that I've known people that that's what it took for them to actually wake up and come to themselves and start taking responsibility for who they really are as a person. Now, does that mean that I would recommend that people go get addicted to heroin in order to find God? No. No, it does not. No, it does not. That's why I think that these are very innately aspects of the individual, and not to be judged, because who's to say, you know, like Jesus with Mary Magdalene, all of the disciples were like, you're going to let a slut touch you? This woman's a prostitute. You're going to let her weep all over your feet and wipe it with her hair? Like, I thought you were God. Like, how are you going to? And he was like, right. Yes. And I love her because she cares to come to me. And to humble herself before me, and she's willing to wash my feet. You guys didn't offer to wash my feet, but she's doing it because she cares and because she's placing herself in a position of being able to be honest about who she is. It is so much better to be honest about who you are than it is to have this fake pompous concept of who you are. And that was something he constantly had to tell his disciples. There is multiple verses where Jesus is frustratingly almost having to try to convey to his disciples, just because you're following me doesn't mean you're better than anybody else. You're following me because you have a very specific work that I require of you, that God requires of you. And being this close to me is a blessing for you so that you can learn directly from the teachers, so that you can do a higher work and a better work. But just because you're able to cast out demons in my name, or just because you're able to save people from their illnesses, does not make you better than those that have the illness. And he had to keep telling them that because they kept forgetting. And he had disciples at one point that were like, so which one of us is going to sit on your right hand in heaven? And he was like, none of you. What the fuck are you talking about? Why is that what you're talking about? Why is that what you're thinking? You think that's what we're doing here? You think that's what it's about, is so that you can figure out what throne you're going to have in heaven? That is not why we do a good work here. In fact, you could do a good work here and still be cast into the lake of fire, and it still speaks on the glory of God. And that is the importance of the work that we're doing. Because Pharaoh in Egypt was enslaving the Israelites, and then went back after them after he already said that he would release them, then went to go re-enslave them. All of that was the work of God through Pharaoh. That was Pharaoh doing his God's work. He ended up dying, and all of his soldiers ended up dying too, and I'm pretty sure he didn't make it to heaven. That wasn't the point. Moses led the entire Israelites through the wilderness for 40 years. And he didn't get to go into paradise. He got to sit on top of a mountain by his damn self watching the Israelites go into paradise. And he thanked God for it, because he realized at that point that that was the power of God, and that was the work of God that he was doing. He was never called to paradise. He was called to lead the Israelites there. Okay, so the work that we're doing isn't so that we can be so righteous, so that we can stand above others and say, oh, look at me. Well, at least I'm not a prostitute. Well, at least I'm not a Pharisee or a Sadducee, you know, which I've fallen in that too. I do struggle with that because I see my family being quite hypocritical, and I struggle. Why can't they just be real Christians? Why can't these people actually just embrace these things? Why are they so scared of evil if they really, truly embrace the power of Christ? Right? But so much of that is arrogance on my part. So much of everything I do is arrogance on my part, and that doesn't make it right. My capacity to be arrogant doesn't say shit about me aside the fact that I'm arrogant. It doesn't mean that I'm right. It doesn't mean that I have the upper hand in any sort of degree. It literally only means that I'm arrogant. And that is so much of the importance of not being arrogant, and why I'm being put through this process to work that arrogance out of me, is because it's not serving any ultimate purpose. In fact, it's working against the message that's trying to move through me, to just truly embrace ourselves as we are. Who I am is not an arrogant person. That arrogance is a deflection and an attempt to, convince others of something, to make myself seem, it's a self-defense mechanism, and not a good one. Like I said, everything bothing, some of my PTSD tendencies aren't the worst things. They really aren't even that bad. In fact, they've served me well. They've been okay. But me being an arrogant cunt is not helping anyone. It really isn't. And I am working on it. It's hard. It's something that I'm learning how to be honest about. I tell people that I'm emotionally immature in some ways, and the way that I've learned to kind of defend my ego against that emotional immaturity, against the judgment that could come from that emotional immaturity being exposed, is to be arrogant. And I've judged others for being assholes in the same exact way that I am. I'm a hypocrite too, right? Not any better than anybody else. And this work that I do isn't to be better than anybody else. Again, it's only to help those that are within the same sort of course of experience that I have been, or that I am, to get to where I am, or where I'm also trying to go. That's it. We're all just climbing this hill together, Just because I'm able to reach down and help somebody that's a little below me up doesn't mean I'm at the top of the fucking hill. It doesn't mean that I'm not struggling. It doesn't mean that I have the upper hand on them. Who's to say that me helping them up doesn't put them up before me? And that doesn't necessarily make them better. It's not about being better than anybody. Nobody's better than anybody else. They really aren't. They really aren't. An honest person isn't better than a liar. Everybody is equal. It's just coming to who we really, really are so that we can have the right relationship with our highest power. Because if we're all in that, as individuals that are part of a grander collective, if we really are all, or the majority of us at least, come into contact and into true alignment with our highest power, that power then begins to open up and speak for itself. The only reason that it seems so quiet, that voice of reason, that voice of balance, that the capacity to be able to not have to do one or the other, but to be able to balance them between us as an individual, is so quiet and so subtle seeming in this reality, is because we've moved so far away from truly knowing ourselves. Right? We're in the reverse. Our emperor is in the reverse in this way. And it's because we've been given to a sense of having to protect ourselves when our true inner strength isn't being accounted for in that self defense. If I knew I really was completely capable, totally strong, and had nothing to fear, I wouldn't need any of that defense. That defense wouldn't come out. I wouldn't be arrogant. That's only coming from an insecurity. If I really was vulnerable, I wouldn't be afraid to receive, and I wouldn't be afraid to give. Those things are coming from not truly knowing myself. The Lord of great strength moves into the universe, the great one of the night of time, into this grand balance. Our strength is in balance. Our strength is in being able to receive both the light in the darkness and the dark in the light. The Ten of Cups in the reverse, the Lord of perfected success. Because we're not trying to attain perfection. This isn't about what throne in heaven, or how many crowns you're going to get, or what jewels are in them, or how big your mansion is. That is not the point of any of this. It's not the point of any of this. It's just to be honest. We haven't even gotten to that point. We can't even know what we're trying to do in the future and what's supposed to happen in the future because we can't even get to the most basic aspect, which is just to truly know ourselves and be okay with that and be protected in ourselves and be able to move between one or the other with confidence. Until we can get there, I don't know how we're going to continue trying to look so far into the future. And I do believe that the reason that it seems that everything in this society is breaking down to such a basic, insanely core aspect is because the universe is trying to get us into this position of being able to receive our 10 of Cups in the upright, but we can't get there because right now we're looking for perfected success. The perfection comes in it being done the way that it needs to be done. You can't rush through. I worked assembly. You can't rush through a certain task, not accomplishing certain things, and expect that the final product is going to be efficient, perfect, sufficient. It won't be. Every tiny, weird little motion, every tiny, weird little movement, everything that you do to that unit prior to it being completed needs to be done properly. Otherwise, that unit isn't going to be able to do exactly what it's meant to do and isn't going to be a quality product. The universe is breaking us down for that reason. Because it wants a quality product. And it knows that we're capable of it. But we are individuals that are part of a grander collective. Each of us, in of ourselves, is our own piece of that unit that is being perfected. And so we must perfect ourselves, which takes knowing ourselves, humbling ourselves, being vulnerable, being willing to be intimate without being codependent, without identifying ourselves by external value, without looking for external saviors, without being arrogant cunts. Okay, I've been talking for an hour and a half and this video is about to end. Kind of wild reading. Hopefully this was helpful. This is one I'm going to have to meditate on a bit. And I got a lot of other work that I got to do today. So I hope that you are productive for the rest of the day. Or that you get the rest that you need. That tonight when you go to sleep, you can rest assured that you are on the right path. And little by little, you can continue to embrace yourself more fully as we all come into alignment with our highest power and thus with ourselves and thus with each other. Tomorrow is going to be a big, beautiful day. And there's just a lot of processing I got to do today. Yeah, all right, thank you. Love you, and I will see you in the next video.